When we moved to the new neighborhood, I truly believed we had finally found the peace we always sought. Our house was everything we had ever dreamed of: a large backyard, a pool for the kids to play in, and an apparently friendly neighborhood. It was the perfect opportunity to raise our children, Emily and Jacob, and start a new phase in our lives. At first, everything seemed perfect. The neighbors were friendly, always waving and smiling as we passed by. The kids adapted quickly, making friends at school and loving the spacious yard. But that began to change as the days went by. After 2 weeks, I started feeling something strange. I don't know if it was the anxiety of finally having a bigger house. On the first night, I felt it. I was alone in the backyard, watering the plants. It was a quiet night, and the sky was clear. Suddenly, I had the feeling of being watched in my own house. I looked around, but saw nothing. I ignored it, thinking it was just my imagination. The next night, while we were having dinner, Allison, my wife, also mentioned that she felt like someone was watching us. I told her about my experience the previous night, but we laughed it off, thinking we were just paranoid because of the recent move. One night, after putting the kids to bed, we were watching TV in the living room. Our favorite show was on. Allison went to get a glass of water in the kitchen, and I stayed on the couch. That's when I saw a quick flash of light by the window, but it didn't seem like just any flash. It looked like the flash of a camera. So if that were the case, who was taking pictures of our property? I got up immediately and went to the door, but saw no one. The neighborhood was quiet, with no one walking around. I went back inside, confused and a little worried. When Allison came back, I told her what I saw, but she said it was probably nothing. Days went by, and this feeling of being watched persisted. One night, we were in the living room again, having dinner in front of the TV. Suddenly, a flash of light crossed the window, quick as lightning. Allison and I looked at each other, alarmed. I got up and ran outside, but as before, I saw no one. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't seen the other night. I noticed the door of the house across the street closing. It was as if someone had quickly gone inside to avoid being seen. When I came back in, I told Allison what I had seen, and we decided that I would talk to the neighbor the next day. The goal wasn't to accuse him, but just to ask if he had noticed anything strange the night before. On the second day after breakfast, I noticed that his car was still parked in front of his house, so I went over there. When I got to his house, I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. I insisted, rang several times, but there was no response. It seemed like the house was empty, but that didn't make sense because everything indicated otherwise. Frustrated, I went back home, planning to try again later. But that week, work demanded a lot from me. I left early and came back late, making it difficult to follow through with my plan. A few days later, we were in the pool with the kids. Jacob was swimming happily, and Emily was playing with her inflatable toys. Allison was inside, preparing a snack. I was sitting by the pool, enjoying a good whiskey, when once again, I saw a flash. This time, I didn't turn around immediately, as I had my back to the light. Instead, I called Allison, who was inside the house, and asked her to look out the living room window. She went to the window and, with a shocked expression, told me that our neighbor across the street was holding a camera, taking pictures of our house. That was the last straw. I got up quickly telling Allison to stay with the kids, and went over to the neighbor's house. I rang the doorbell several times, but like before, there was no answer. Things were clear, and what he was doing was not normal. He was violating our privacy. So I called the police. When the officers arrived, I told them everything that had happened. From the first day, I saw the flash to the latest incident. They went to the neighbor's house, but it seemed empty again, though this time, the door was slightly open as if someone had left in a hurry. With the door ajar, the police decided to go in. When they entered, what they found inside was disturbing. The house was full of photos of various families in the neighborhood, including ours. There were photos taken from afar and some very close, as if the photographer had been watching us closely. This explained the constant feeling of being watched. The neighbor had disappeared, and no one knew where he had gone. The police started an investigation, but never managed to find the man. In the days that followed, the sense of security we had when we moved to that neighborhood completely disappeared. Allison and I lived in a constant state of alert, trying to protect our kids and regain the peace we once had. We never found out who that man really was, or why he was taking photos of all the families in the neighborhood. I have lived here for many years, going on 20 years now. I am a kind of elder in this neighborhood. Even as a regular citizen, I give my all to maintain order and tranquility around here. My children were born and are growing up here. Since then, we have kept the neighborhood safe without worrying about thieves or other types of psychopaths. My children could play in the street without major concerns, while my wife and I took care of our home and worked to ensure a secure future for them. But all of that changed when a new neighbor moved into the house next door. The man was discreet, but he always seemed to be watching everything around him. We never knew much about him, only that his name was Mark and that he lived alone. He wasn't the type to join the weekend barbecues or neighborhood parties. To be honest, no one knew what he did for a living. Gradually, however, I started noticing some strange things about him. One night, late, I heard a noise coming from Mark's house. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged. I got out of bed and went to the window to check what was going on outside. I didn't open the window, I just slid the curtain to the right. That night, I saw Mark carrying a large black bag out of the house. The size and shape of the bag were questionable. It seemed to contain something bulky and heavy. A truck was parked in front of his house where he threw the bag. He then quickly looked around and went back inside. At that moment, I realized that something was wrong. The way he looked around was definitely to ensure no one saw him throwing that bag into the truck. And usually, when we see that kind of look on someone, it's surely something bad. The next day, I mentioned to my wife what I had seen. She suggested it could just be trash or some kind of work material. I tried to accept this explanation, which seemed logical to some extent, but it didn't explain why he did it so late at night. However, I decided I needed to be more attentive. In the following weeks, I observed strange movements of people entering and leaving Mark's house, always at night. Cars would stop in front of the house, but they weren't just any cars. They were only top-of-the-line cars. People would get out, stay for a few minutes, and then leave. I started to suspect that something more sinister was happening. I began to think that Mark was a drug dealer, and if that was the case, this neighborhood was definitely not the place for him. So, I decided I needed to find out more. One day, while Mark was out, I approached his house. The windows were darkened, making it difficult to see inside. I walked around the house, looking for something that could give me a clue. That's when I noticed a strange smell coming from the garage. It was a metallic odor of something rotten and chemical at the same time. I questioned myself, saying, "What is this?" As I quickly moved away before anyone saw me, my concern grew when one day, coming back from work, I found an anonymous note under my door. In the note, someone warned that Mark was not who he appeared to be, that he was involved in something very dangerous. The note said to protect my family and stay away from him. With that note, my worst fears were confirmed. I began to investigate more deeply, searching online for information about him, but I couldn't find anything. It was as if Mark didn't exist. One night, I heard noises again, coming from Mark's house. This time, the sounds were even more disturbing. I heard muffled voices, as if someone was being held down. I didn't know what he was doing, but it was nothing good. So, I decided I needed to call the police, but I feared it might be too late for the person inside that house. But before I could make the call, I was interrupted by a desperate scream coming from my children's room upstairs. I dropped the phone and ran upstairs, my heart pounding frantically. When I reached the room, I saw Mark, with an expression of pure evil, trying to drag one of my children through the window. He had broken the glass and entered without anyone noticing. I don't know how he did it, but he did. At that moment, without thinking twice, I ran toward him, grabbed him with all my strength, and we started a deadly fight. Mark was strong, but the adrenaline and the fear of losing my child gave me strength I didn't know I had. My wife screamed for help, and soon the neighbors appeared to see what was happening. Mark managed to break free after stabbing me in the arm and fled, jumping out the window. My wife immediately called the police. When they arrived, I explained everything that had happened, from the mysterious bags to the anonymous note and the attempted kidnapping. They searched Mark's house, and what they found was beyond imaginable. Mark's garage was equipped with surgical instruments, storage containers, and detailed documents about an organ trafficking operation. There was evidence that he was involved in an international network, kidnapping people and removing their organs for sale on the black market. My mind couldn't process the enormity of the horror that had happened so close to my family. Mark escaped, and the police did everything they could to find him. But as I said before, he had no records. It was as if he was a ghost, with no data on him. These days, the police make regular rounds in the neighborhood, hoping he might return, as he left behind many expensive-looking pieces of equipment. This is my story. It's not something I like to share, but I feel it's important to alert others to the dangers that can be closer than we imagine. Stay vigilant, protect your families, and don't ignore the signs. Evil can be closer than we think. Tell me in the comments, which of these stories got to you? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Stay tuned for the next stories by hitting the notification bell. See you in the next story.